The first thing is when Boris Johnson says we did everything we could. When he said that yesterday, I think the whole nation thought, did you? You didn't, did you? You didn't do everything that you could to prevent this terrible death toll. We didn't do everything that we could on PPE. We didn't do everything we could on care homes. We didn't do everything we could on testing. We didn't do everything we could on borders. We didn't do everything we could on locking down early. We didn't do everything we could on contact tracing. We didn't do everything we could when we told people to eat out to help out. We didn't do everything we could when it came to schools. We didn't do everything we could when it came to doing a circuit breaker. We didn't do everything we could when it came to mixing at Christmas. What did we do to prevent this grim milestone?
Well, I think the point the Prime Minister was making, and I would attest to this because I was in many of those meetings with him, that he and the government did everything that we could on the basis of the information that we had available to us. We marshalled all the resources that we had, whether that's the brilliant staff of the NHS and social care, local councils, the armed forces, British medical and scientific ingenuity with the vaccine rollout. Have we made the right decisions in every respect? Well, I suspect, with the benefit of hindsight, the answer in some cases will be no.
Okay, which cases?
Which cases? Be very proud
let's
of,
get it. Okay, that's an important. That's an important.
Which no doubt people will say we could have done differently.
Okay, that's an important admission. So let's get into what you got wrong. Tell us what you got wrong as a government in the last 11 months.
Well, I think it's not easy to make those assessments with confidence today. I don't say that to pass the buck. I think it's just that it will be with greater distance.
But you can't think of any mistakes that you've made that you're prepared.
You're not prepared to say.
You're not prepared to cite any mistakes you've made as a government.
Well, I can say of the things that I have responsibility for, there are things that I would and have done differently as the pandemic has evolved. For example, with the vaccine rollout today, we're trying to ensure that local councils are as involved as possible because they're the ones on the ground who know the harder to reach communities, to ensure that everybody gets access to the virus. When in earlier stages of the pandemic, I think there was legitimate criticism that we could have used local councils even more. I think, for example, in the early stages of the pandemic, of the way that rules were interpreted, which prevented people going to the funerals of their loved ones, something that partly comes under my responsibility in the department, and I was heartbroken to see those.
But you don't think, for example,
children not being able to have their parents at their funerals.
Mr. Jenrick,
there are definitely things that I have got wrong, that the government has got wrong,
I understand that,
and which we've tried to learn from as the pandemic has gone forward.
I understand that, but you've made far bigger, catastrophic mistakes, haven't you? Not locking down when most other countries were doing it back in March, April, which people now believe may have cost 25,000 lives, saying that mass gatherings were fine. And so you sent 250,000 people happily off to the Cheltenham races and let people come in from Madrid, which was in lockdown, to spend 2 days on the lash in Liverpool. We know that with PPE, we didn't have enough to protect our health and care workers. Over 800 of them have died. We know we pursued a policy of herd immunity, which was completely wrong and completely ridiculous, given the last pandemic was the SARS pandemic back in 2003, which is why the Asian countries were so much better prepared for this than we were. You know that with the circuit breaker that was advised by SAGE from September onwards, you dithered and delayed, as you have done as a government throughout this, and didn't take the action you should have done early enough. We know that through Christmas, it was obviously ridiculous to give everyone a day off because the virus never got the memo, but you still allowed them to do it in most parts of the country. We know that eventually we locked down in January way too late, given this new variant exploded, and you knew from mid-December how dangerous it was in terms of the speed of transmission, but you didn't lock us down until January. And so we're now getting still daily figures. 1,600 deaths recorded yesterday alone. Thousands and thousands a week more dying. We could have this death toll doubling in 3 months' time. So the mistakes that you've made are on a far greater scale than the ones that you're citing. They have been a series of cataclysmic government failures. And my question, watching the Prime Minister yesterday, he's sorry. He's sorry about people dying. And I get that he's sorry. We're all sorry that people have died. Of course we are. But what I want to know is, what's he sorry for the decisions he's done? Can you tell us? Does the Prime Minister regret anything he's done?
Well, I'm sure that with the benefit of hindsight, there would be things that he might have done differently. There'll also be things, I'm not saying this in a glib way, but there will also be things that he and the whole country should be very proud of. The way that the NHS didn't get overwhelmed, as we saw with some other very sophisticated health systems around the world, like in Italy.
It didn't get overwhelmed because you sent thousands of old people. Sorry, let me jump in there.
I'm sorry, jobs.
Mr. Jenrick, the NHS. Let's just cut to the quick of this mythology. The NHS didn't get run over in the first wave of this because you sent thousands and thousands of elderly people without COVID tests back into care homes where 20,000 or more of them then died from COVID-19. You didn't save the NHS. What you did was you parked the problem out of the NHS and threw it into care homes. And care homes are currently going through another horrendous surge of this again. And yet you keep telling us as a government, we've put a protective ring around them. We are caring for the care homes. They don't feel like you are. They feel like that once again they've been left laid bare to this virus. And again, I just come back to the bigger picture. No one in the government will admit to any big errors which have caused huge death numbers on these tolls. No one will admit to it. And you're the guy they've sent out today to try and defend the indefensible. Surely, looking back, you would be saying to yourselves, we've made a disaster of this. And if that is the case, who's accountable? Because our viewers, 2/3 of them right now in our poll, they think the Prime Minister, who yesterday admitted, I was Prime Minister, I take full responsibility. Well, if that's the case, and we have the worst death toll in Europe and the 5th worst in the world and the current worst death rate anywhere in the world, why is he not resigning?
Well, look, I think you asked me the question, did we get everything right? I think almost certainly we didn't get everything right. How you can have, I don't think it's easy with the current position to make an analysis. I think there will come a time when we can reflect, we can learn lessons, and there will be some things that we can conclude about the particular characteristics of the country and the way in which the government responded, and we can put those into the proper international perspective. Today, obviously, the government's priority is on ensuring that the vaccine rollout proceeds at pace.
Robert Jenrick,
That's
can
going
I ask,
well today, but clearly there's a lot more
vaccinations
work to be done.
is absolutely a priority right now. I just wonder whether you think that the government took coronavirus seriously enough right at the beginning.
Yes.
Because you do think that they took it seriously.
Well, I can assure you that we all took coronavirus very seriously.
When did you first hear about it?
Within weeks, we had the Prime Minister
Mr. Jenrick, when did you first hear about
for his life? So I can assure you that
Mr. Jenrick,
we all took this extremely seriously.
When did you first hear about it yourself, coronavirus?
Well, I don't recall the exact date, but like you, it will have been around about this time last year when we started to see
it was the third week of January
with events in China.
Right, 3rd week of January. And what did the British Prime Minister do for the next 6 weeks? He missed 5 Cobra meetings to look into COVID because he was dealing with domestic issues in his life. And then on March the 3rd, he pops up, finally. And this is what he told the British people. After 6 weeks of this virus rampaging around the world, Boris Johnson addressed the British people and he gave his advice about how we should all be handling this deadly virus. Take a look.
I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know, and I continue to shake hands. And I think it's very important that we, people obviously can make up their own minds. I think the subcommittee
had said that their advice was against shaking hands because it might transmit the coronavirus infection.
Well, look, I think it's obviously easy to show footage like that with the benefit of hindsight. Knowledge has evolved, scientific opinion has changed. Chris Whitty last night at the press conference said that our knowledge of masks, of the impact of
Jenrick, that
the
wasn't the benefit of hindsight. That was on the same day as the scientific advisors were saying to stop shaking hands.
But I think if I could just answer the question, your central sort of charge that the Prime Minister didn't take this seriously, that is not fair or correct. The Prime Minister that I've watched throughout this crisis has approached this with huge seriousness. He's someone who himself came close to death as a result of the virus, and that had a huge and lasting impact upon him and his family, as you'd expect. And so he is focused now on ensuring that we can move forward, that we can get the vaccine into as many people's arms as quickly as possible, that it reaches all parts of society, and then that we can start to move forward as a country.
What do you say, Robert Jenrick, on behalf of the British government? What do you say to the families of these 100,000 victims, given that we are, you can see from the numbers, worst in the world in many metrics for how we have handled this crisis? What do you say to these people who've lost their loved ones, the ones that we just pay tribute to?
Well, I'd say, like the Prime Minister did last night, that I'm deeply, deeply sorry for every life that's been lost. COVID has affected everyone, but some people very profoundly. I think we all know someone who has either been seriously unwell or who's died as a result of the virus. Last night, my mum messaged me to say that a close family friend of ours had died in hospital in Wolverhampton over the weekend. Some people today watching your programme will be mourning loved ones who may have died recently or earlier in the pandemic, and this is incredibly raw and painful to them. Our deepest sympathy and condolences go out to them, and we owe it to them to ensure that we do everything we can now to handle the remaining stages of the pandemic as efficiently as we possibly can. The focus of that has to be on the vaccine, ourselves making sure that we've got the supply and we roll it out swiftly, and that we build trust and confidence amongst all communities so that everybody comes forward, whether that's members of the BME community, migrant workers, the homeless, which is my responsibility. So we protect as many people as we can as quickly as possible, and then we can start to move on to the world beyond COVID and to build a better country.
Okay, and who is accountable? Because so far, not a single member of this cabinet has been fired for incompetence, and yet department after department, you could list a ton of failures with all of them. Nobody seems to be accountable. We just carry on relying on the same people, many of whom have come on. And I have to give you credit. You know, you come on here and you face the music, and, you know, you put up a creditable job defending often the indefensible. But some of your colleagues, Mr. Jenrick, they're useless. And I take no pleasure in saying that. They come on here and they expose themselves as unbelievably mediocre people who are completely out of their depth, running huge departments in a pandemic. We need better people. And we need people who are not good enough to step aside and to do the right thing for their country.
Well, look, we're all working under, immense strain, but that's no excuse. We all have to make sure that we're making the best possible decisions we can with the information that's available to us. As I've tried to say repeatedly, there will be things that, with the benefit of hindsight, we could and should have done differently. There will also be things that we have done very well as a country and which we should rightly be proud of. I don't mean that the government itself should be proud. I mean everyone should be proud, because almost every one of those things has been a united collective effort. I think in my own department, I'm immensely proud of the way that we've helped to shield 33,000 homeless people and ensure that very few of those people who are sleeping rough on the streets have died of COVID-19. But the task has not stopped. There's a huge amount still to be done, and we've got to ensure that we can weather the remaining stages of this as well as we possibly can. And then we look more positively to the future to try to rebuild the country.
We all want positive news, but can we just agree this is a shameful milestone for this country?